For much of Janet Sherlund's young life, she felt hopeless and helpless. She thought it impossible to discover who she really was or to find a way to fill the big black hole at her very inner core. She believed finding her birth mother would heal the deep loss and grief, but with absolutely no information, and before the era of DNA testing, she was helpless to do so, and thought her only choice was to live with that pain. The title of her book, Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me, sent shivers up my spine, as I know of many people who have lived in similar pain, and you are going to relate with Janet's story today.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Janet Sherlund's interview is going to touch you in ways that you probably didn't even think was possible, just as it touched me. We're so happy to have her on Never Ever Give Up Hope today. Welcome, Janet.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with hearing your story.
Okay. Well, as you indicated in your lovely introduction, I was adopted, and I was adopted back in the 1950s during the era, they call it the baby scoop era, but it was an era where really all adoptions were completely closed. And that means there was absolutely no information about where I came from, what my family of origin was, really what the story is, why was I adopted. My birth certificate was issued to my adoptive parents with their names on it, and all my records were sealed. And to this day, I'm now 70 years old, to this day, they are sealed in the state of New Jersey, where I was born and adopted, and remain sealed in the same way in 40 other states. And I spent my life living, as you mentioned, with this big black hole inside of me, and feeling really compelled to try and explain that to people. And I think I was trying to fix it in myself. I knew I felt this weird feeling, and I knew I felt very other and different and disconnected and untethered. And I couldn't explain that because I actually had a perfectly fine adoption. I mean, I had a perfectly fine family. I also had 3 adopted siblings. We were all adopted from different families. We all knew we were adopted. Our bedtime story included the story of my parents going to the agency and picking us up. So there was never a reveal or a big aha. I knew my entire life that I was adopted. I don't think I really understood what that meant. We never talked about the feelings of it, or that any of us might be struggling with something over it. It was then, as it remains for many people now, adoption is viewed as a Hallmark movie, and a baby is looked as a blank slate, and there's the belief that love is all you need, and that if you give a child who needs a home to loving parents, they will grow up happy and healthy and have had great opportunities, and all will be fine. When in fact that's not the case. And even if you're have a successful adoption like I did, and loving parents, and even if you succeed in life, I was a a very good student, a very well-behaved child. I've had a successful adult life, a successful marriage, lovely children. I mean, anyone looking at me thinks I've led a perfectly fine life, and I have externally, but I have certainly lived with great trauma and struggled with that and suffered from that all of my life. And adoption is a culturally unrecognized trauma, and it is the only trauma in which the victims are expected to be grateful. And I also remind people that two things can be true at once. You can have a perfectly fine adoption and be grateful for your adoptive parents and all the opportunities you've been given, and still have been traumatized by being adopted. It was that message that I've kind of realized I've been trying to talk about my whole life, to tell people the difference. Like, it's hard to imagine when you have a family what it's like to not know who you are, where you came from, to not have any stories of your ancestors or your heritage to bring forward and to sort of place yourself within or compare yourself against. It's when I was young and I'd say to people, "Oh, I wish I'd seen someone who looks like me." Their response was usually, "Oh, I don't look like my parents. That's not important." Or they might say, "Well, I like this and no one else in my family likes that." That's not important. But it's only not important if you have it. When you don't have it, there's actually a term for it. It's called genealogical bewilderment. And it's very difficult for us as human beings, especially as growing, developing children, to understand ourselves and to form a sense of self when we don't have that connection to the stories and the ancestry. We don't see ourselves mirrored in family members, whether it's parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles or siblings. And we have no basis, no foundation to help form a sense of self. Like, you poofed into the air one day. There's no awareness, no stories, nothing with which to tell you how you came to be. No one on earth that you can look at and say, "I look like them," or "I see myself in that person." There's a great feeling of just being other and different and untethered that you actually feel. It's a very visceral. And as I've gone through this journey, and ultimately did as an adult meet my biological parents, I've learned how visceral and how cellular and how biological identity and belonging are. And it's things that I felt as a child. I felt the absence of it as a child, but I didn't understand it. And so, of course, as a child, when you feel weird or odd, and I wasn't being mistreated in my adoptive home. There was nothing I could point to that was wrong, but I just felt lost and I felt sad. And I couldn't understand this. No one said to me, "Those are perfectly normal reactions when you've been separated at birth from your biological mother and you've been handed to strangers and you're being asked to live a life that you know is not true. You know that this wasn't this isn't the heritage you have. This isn't the name you were born with. These are your," and we don't understand the impact that all of that has on the individual being asked to live that life. We culturally talk about the wants and needs and morality of adoptive parents. Oh, they want a child, they need a child, and they're so wonderful to adopt a child. We also talk about the wants and needs of the biological family. They can't raise a child, they need to find a home for this child, and we often judge them negatively. No one's talking about what is it like to be that individual that's separated from their heritage and their family of origin through no choice of their own and given to strangers, and then assigned an identity, assigned a false identity, and asked to live your life as that person and have no context for yourself as you grow up and feel so viscerally, cellularly different than your family. And no one tells you that that's a normal reaction. Carol, if I said to you tonight, look around you and the first house you see that you don't know who lives there, okay, just imagine that house. I'm going to take you over there tonight and I'm going to leave you with those people for the rest of your life. Now, they're really nice people. I know them. They're really nice people. They want you to join their family so much, and they're going to take such good care of you. but you're going to go there tonight. I'm just going to drop you off. You're going to live there the rest of your life. And you will kind of probably, as you imagine, I have this visceral reaction like, whoa, wait, I don't know those people. It's going to feel strange. It's going to smell strange and look strange. And no thanks. But we ask that of infants who don't have language yet to process the shock. When we're in utero, we hear our mother's voices. Oh my gosh, we certainly smell them. We are chemically part of them. And when a baby is born, they talk about how it's so important for them to stay close to and connected with their mother. And that's because that's their safety, their world, their whole existence depends on that relationship. And when that's severed at birth, certainly when you're taken to be adopted, or certainly in extreme circumstances where the mother might die in childbirth or some other awful scenario, that baby is traumatized. And though they don't have language with which to recall it later in life, they do remember the trauma. They do feel that loss of everything that felt safe and secure and it assured their survival. They could certainly feel the difference when they were handed to strangers. No matter how loving those strangers might be, they still aren't the person, the being, the person, the sounds, the tempo, everything that they learned in utero, and they're missing all the cues and messages and familiarity that they're just sort of programmed to receive as an infant. When I was growing up, there were 4 of us. We were all adopted, as I said, from different families, and we'd sit around the dinner table every night, and you just felt that everyone was someone different. None of us shared blood, and all of us were just very unique individuals, and we had very different temperaments and personalities and appearances, and you felt more like you were sitting around a table at a meeting with people rather than this level of knowledge and instinct and comfort of biological family members, even ones that may annoy you, but at least they're part of you. You understand them, and there's a connection. There's a very different connection that you feel when you're in a room with your family. And again, you could not like your family. You could be annoyed with your family. There could be family members you don't even talk to anymore, but you still have a certain feeling when you're with them. And that's a very different feeling than the feeling that when you're in a room with friends, even friends that you're very close to and you love very much. There is something cellular and biological about belonging. And that's severed in adoption. And then you grow up, like I did, in this era of closed records, and you don't know what's wrong with you. And so you figure it's yourself. And you feel the grief. Even as a child, there's this underlying sadness, but you don't know what you're sad about. And there's this feeling of being other and untethered. And you go, well, that doesn't make sense because I'm being well taken care of. And it would have been so helpful to have that identified and talked about. To be able to have adoptive parents say, I know you have another family and I know you're missing them. And I can't imagine what that feels like. But I love you and I'm here for you and I want to support you. And then you'd realize it's the situation and not you. But we didn't get those messages. And this issue remains important today because there are people dealing with all sorts of issues of identity nowadays, including, donor conceived individuals who are saying, I really need to know who my father is, besides he was sperm donor 1, 2, 3. And people are going, you don't need to know that. That's not important. But if you don't have it, it's critically important. And we have to identify and respect, I think, as a culture, all that goes into belonging and identity. And love is not enough. It is not enough for the individual. It may be enough for the adoptive parents or the single mother to give to her child, but it's not enough for them to grow into an integrated and healthy and whole human being. We all handle trauma differently. There are those who will deny that they're suffering. There are those who will numb it with drugs or alcohol. And some of us are propelled to figure it out. And I think that's how I reacted. I kept thinking, if I just find out the answers, I'll feel better. And so I I literally thought every day of my life, who is my mother? Where did I come from? Well, I mean, I would look in the mirror until I disassociated with that, that image that I had no context for. And I would just have like this feeling of panic and of such loss and strangeness. And I looked at literally every woman's face in every crowd, wondering if that person could be my mother. That's a horrible thing, a horrible feeling to grow up with. And it really also affected my behavior. Again, adoptees often choose one of two paths. Either you're the rebel and you push back against everything and you're always testing the waters and you're going to see if this family, your adoptive family, will they get rid of me too, just like my birth family did? Or you become the perfect child to try and assure your place with this family that they will never want to give you up. But in both cases, the adoptee feels like, and no matter how rational they know this may not be, or irrational they know this may be, the feeling you have, especially as a child, is something was wrong with me. I wasn't wanted by my people, by my blood, by my mother. I was given away. I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. And that's a very powerful rejection and very powerful message to carry through life. Two of my siblings were the rebels and pushed back and got in trouble all the time. And two of us were the goody two shoes. And I tried to be like the perfect child so that I assured my place in my adoptive family. While that made me probably a successful person, I was never real. I mean, I had there was no freedom in my life to express anything negative, to express an actual opinion. I just did anything that I could to please my adoptive parents, particularly my adoptive mother, who were very different people. And I was also at a time in life when most people were growing up and separating, adolescence. I was very dependent on my adoptive parents still. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go away. I didn't want to take opportunities that most teenagers and young people do because I felt so untethered and so scared and so frightened in life that I just clung so hard to the one thing I knew and shaped myself to be the person they wanted me to be rather than have the freedom to explore and find out who I really was. So, I've had people tell me that they know an adopted child and how wonderful that and they're such a successful person and they never do anything wrong and they're just so well behaved. And I say that's a red flag. That's not someone who's being an authentic, full range human being. That's someone who's trying to please so hard that they are restricted. There's a lot that goes on that I think people don't understand. And I think the suffering that adoptees go through life with, it's also something we often don't talk about because we are grateful. We don't want to hurt our adoptive families. And I didn't write my book until I was in my 60s, until my adoptive parents had passed away, because I never wanted to hurt them. That's a powerful statement. I sort of suffered in silence my entire life. It wasn't silent. I mean, talked to friends. I talked to my husband, but and I read everything I could, and I did an independent study on adoption and identity when I was in college, and just sought out education and information about it. Certainly took advantage of a lot of therapy in my life to learn more about it. But this was something that was really part of me every single day of my life, and certainly was a detriment to me as an individual. And I suffered because of it. I needed to write this book to try and let people feel it's written both very emotionally, very descriptively, and I really wanted people to be able to feel the blackness, the sorrow, the grief, the loss that an adoptee lives with, so that they will be open to understanding that and participating in things like if their state has a vote for opening adoption records, they'll understand it in a different way than maybe they have in the past. And many of the issues that we as a society deal with today that still deal with issues of identity and belonging. It's like, let's take lessons from adoption and learn how meaningful and how powerful things are, what mistakes we've made in the past. Let's do adoption better going forward. Let's try and be open and transparent. Let's really support kinship adoptions. Let's stop judging adoption by whether the adoptive family has a bigger house or more income or two parents. Let's stop judging it by superficial things and really understand what an individual needs to be a healthy and intact and whole human being, and make sure that the needs of the adoptee are at the center of adoption and not the needs and wants and desires of the parents on either side. I wrote my book. It was published last May, and it's been so gratifying to not only have the affirmation of other adoptees saying, yeah, you wrote my experience, you wrote my pain, and affirm that it wasn't just me, that this is something we experience. But I've had so many non-adoptees come to me and say, I never knew. I didn't realize. I'm looking at this in a whole different way now. And I didn't expect that. And yet it's been so gratifying to open these conversations and help people see the side of adoption that they may have not understood.
Well, you had my attention every single second because we adopted our child when he was three days old, and I am listening and remembering, many things that have happened in his life as I'm listening to what you are saying. My question to you is, when he knew he was adopted from his, according to his understanding, and right through the time, that he was a very little boy. And when he was 18, we wanted to have the records open so that if he wanted to, he could contact his parents. He did not want to and got very angry that we would even do that. I'm kind of reading between the lines of what you are saying. But before I turn it back over to you, when he was going to get married a few years later, his fiance wanted him to have his records opened as well. And again, he became very angry and did not want to do that. And so he didn't, even though I already had received all the information. So it was, it was available.
Yeah.
So your thoughts on that for somebody who does not want to have that connection?
Yeah, I've seen that. It's interesting. My experience and from everything I've read is that now it's a tough thing. It's a really scary thing and a hard thing to go there and to find this out. Sometimes you're terrified of what you may find. Sometimes you don't. You're protecting yourself. It's interesting. The point I'm ultimately trying to make here is that it's a matter of timing. Everyone deals with their trauma differently and faces it differently. And some people can't go there. Some people can't face it. Others, it comes at a time in life when they're either older or when an adoptive parent dies or when they're ill or maybe when they have children or maybe when they've lost a job. It varies in people as to when they can go there. One of my brothers, my younger brother, always said, oh, I don't want to know. I don't care. Mom and dad are our parents. I'm not interested in anything else. And continued to say that throughout life. And he's only a couple years younger than me, so he's in his late 60s now. And then he read my book and he called me up and he said, I wish I had searched. He said, I said, but you always said you didn't want to. And he said, yeah, because I was being defensive. He said, I kept thinking, well, if they didn't want me to hell them, I don't want them either. He said, but now I wish I had searched. I'm sorry I didn't. Not that it's too late, but obviously his birth parents may not be alive anymore. When I had one woman come up to me after an appearance, and she said, my mother was adopted and never searched, never wanted to go there. And on her deathbed in her 90s, she grabbed my hands and said to me, will you please find my family and will you please make that connection? I am so sorry I didn't. So it is something that's there, I think, in everyone. Whether you can expose yourself to the sort of the mystery, the confusion, the hurt, and the rejection, and fear again, further rejection, because that's very, very painful. And I had one great experience with finding a birth parent and one horrible experience with finding a birth parent, and it's very painful. It takes a lot to manage it and go through it. You need a lot of support. So I've heard that story before, where adoptees just know I don't want to go there. but that doesn't mean they never will. It's just not the right time for them. And that you also have to understand the powerfully emotional journey it is to
Right.
meet them and confront them. And suddenly you have to make sense of yourself both as a biological person and as an adoptive person and kind of integrate those. It's a lot of work, and it's not always something your son when he has children. I mean, our firstborn son, we never knew who he looked like, and when I met my birth father, it he looked exactly like my birth father. But we never knew my birth father. So he looked exactly like his maternal grandfather, which in a biological family, you would have known from birth. And this was something we didn't know until he was a grown up already. So it's sometimes the things you want to learn for your children or through your children also um, often prompt more interest in that heredity.
I thank you for that. Thank you. Our son has 9 children, so
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
it's
Wow.
a blended family. But he has
Oh,
4 of his own, and then and 5. So it's just, yeah, I'm just
yeah.
really relating to what you were saying and thinking about times in his life, and I'm sharing that because I believe that a lot of people in the audience are probably relating as well in different places and different things that you.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick 15-second break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about your book. So we'll be right back.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another: gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
As I stated before the break, this is really touching my heart in many ways, and as I also am assured that it is touching the hearts of many people who are both, or possibly either the adopted or the one doing the adoption. You opened up areas for me to think about, and I will think about this for a long time, I am sure, and some of the things that you shared is incredible to see that side of the story. And you are unique, I am sure, and you did allude to that as well, that not too many people go out there and study this to the as you have. So I applaud you for that, and I applaud you for walking through all the pain and everything that you had to go through while you were making this decision to write this book, etc. So tell us a bit more about your book and how you reacted and how you found your birth parents.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting. I know people adoptees who grew up to become therapists or social workers. Or it really, really got into the, professional study of that, which of course I didn't do that. But I'd always been a writer. I majored in both fine arts and literature, and always seemed to be driven to try and communicate, to allow people to feel things and make a connection with people. I think adoptees like to connect. And I always had this drive to connect with people, and I was hoping that, again, my contribution to adoptee advocacy work would be to write something that would allow people to understand, to really feel it. The old Maya Angelou quote about people will forget what you said or what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I'm hoping that, by sharing, by writing and very, very graphically and deeply the feelings, will allow people to glimpse this world they may not understand well. As I grew up, again, there was no opportunities to find out anything about my story, my belonging, my beginning, my authentic family, family of origin, and I always wanted to know I tried back in the 70s. There were a couple things that would come up, organizations that if you could apply to, and they would try and if like as an adoptee, and if your birth parent applied to them also, they'd connect you. And I applied, and no one ever, my birth mother clearly hadn't participated in that. It just felt like I went through life just hopeless and helpless. My husband, when I got married, said, let's hire someone to search, but we had literally nothing to go on. We had no name, no place of birth, nothing, no scrap of information. And this was before DNA testing, before social media. And so it just seemed like a waste how are you going to hunt down something that there's not even a place to start. I had been given a false narrative, not really a false narrative. When I was in college and I had done a study on adoption and identity, I got an A+ on my final paper, and I sent that to my adoption agency as kind of an external validation of my genuine desire to know more about myself, and that I wasn't just a disgruntled teenage adoptee. I was really thinking about this and studying it. And they sent me back some non-identifying information that was very general, and ultimately, the end of this journey in search for myself, I realized that a lot of it was really scrubbed and made to sound much better than it was in reality. Finally, I was, I guess, in my 60s, and I was talking to my adoptive mother, my mom, one night, saying, "Whatever happened to our adoption agency? I thought it had long since gone out of business." And she said, "Oh, it's still there. And in fact, they have a website." And I jumped onto the website, and I saw this little box in the corner about search. And it turned out that my adoption agency, if both the adoptee and the biological parent agreed, they would connect them. In the state of New Jersey, where I was adopted, the records are all still sealed. But they would, reach out to the parties individually, and if people agreed, they'd connect them. And so I immediately applied, and there was such a long list of adoptees who had placed wanting this. It took 9 months. She said 9 months to a year to come up, to be next on the list. Finally came up. They, in fact, found my birth mother, who it turned out, they didn't tell me this at the time, it turned out lived about 2 towns away from me. They found her, and she refused to meet me. And that was devastating. And I, at the time, didn't understand why it was so devastating. I was in my 50s. I had a good life. I had a loving family. I had therapy. I had studied this. I understood the cultural shame, the shame that unwed mothers back in the 50s experienced, and how difficult it was to release that shame. And I was just so shocked that my birth mother didn't want to meet me. When I had done my own study, they said 96% of birth mothers want to meet the child they gave up, even if it was a child, born of rape or some other, very difficult circumstance. So I wasn't prepared for this woman I'd been told, who was, so responsible, gave you up to give you a better life, all of that. Like, why wouldn't you want to meet me? And I didn't need anything from her. I had a very successful life. I just wanted to meet her. I wanted to see someone who looked like me. And when she said no, she wouldn't even meet me. I kind of froze for a month. I remember it was December, it was Christmas, and I just kind of sat on this sofa for a month and I was so deeply sad I couldn't even cry. I was devastated. I felt so hurt. And it wasn't until later when I went back, I love the book by Nancy Newton-Verrier, The Primal Wound. It was written in the 90s, and it is just a wonderful, wonderful book about the adoptee experience and the adoptee point of view. And I started reading that again. It was well dog-eared copy that I had. And way in the back of the book was this little section that talked about if an adult adoptee, reaches out to a birth parent and gets denied, gets rejected again, that it's devastating, that it brings back all the feelings of loss and rejection and hurt from, when that happened to them as an infant before they had words. There weren't words to define that experience, but you're reliving all of that pain. Again, I just had never imagined that my mother wouldn't just want to meet me. And then they asked me if they said, but we have the name of your father. Would you like to meet him?
Hmm.
And I had never thought about that. I really had never really thought about him. I had found out when I asked the agency when I was in college. One of the things they said is your birth father doesn't know he fathered you. That your mother got pregnant and left town and never went back, and this man doesn't know he fathered you. So I was thinking, how does this man who doesn't even know I exist? Why would I want to meet him? But again, I had children. I was tired of writing unknown on every page of medical history for both myself and them, and I said, sure, why not? I guess so. I'll meet the guy, but didn't expect much out of that. And they reached out to him, and my father was a retired New York State trooper, and he's sitting at home watching Jeopardy, and he gets a phone call saying, you have a daughter and she'd like to meet you. And he was totally blown away. He called my birth mother to find out if this were true, and she hung up on him. She wouldn't even confirm or nor deny it to him. But when the agency called him back, he said, if she has my blood, she's my daughter. Of course, I want to meet her. And it was a life-changing. We met about a month later. We met halfway between our homes, and he also brought my half brother and his wife and my half sister. Although we don't use the term half now, we just say sister and brother, but biological. And I describe it in my book. I mean, the instant transformation I felt.
Wow.
I didn't know two things about this man. I knew his name. I didn't know anything about him. He could have been I literally knew nothing about him more than his name. When he came up to me, and I was a wreck. I was so nervous. I was like, I was a wreck. And he came up to me, and he put his hands on mine, and he looked into my eyes, and he said, you're Janet. And I looked into his eyes, and in that moment, that big black hole inside of me just filled up, just in that moment. Again, I didn't know anything about the man, but I looked into these eyes that were my eyes. And it was like I looked into his face, and I finally made sense for the first time in my life. I made sense. And that big black hole, it was like I felt it physically just go ka-chunk and fill up. And I was floored. And then he showed me a yearbook picture of his yearbook picture, and he looked exactly like our firstborn son. I mean, it was just uncanny. But so that really physical, visceral, it's like my cells recognized home. And I felt that feeling. And later, when I was, that summer, when the whole family came up and visited me in Nantucket, and we were sitting around watching a movie one night in the living room, and I thought, I still can't answer 10 questions about any of the people with me in this room, but I have never felt more whole and more at home and like I am more with family in my entire life. And yet I can't answer 10 questions about them. It's such a sense of belonging that you miss as an adoptee. And it's just so cellular. It's just, I'm convinced that there are so many things about belonging and identity that we don't understand as human beings, that maybe we respect and understand in the animal kingdom, but we don't understand it about ourselves, and we are animals and we still have those experiences. And then even 5 years later, when I met my reluctant birth mother, and she didn't really want to meet me, I talk about it a lot in the book, but she didn't want to meet me. Only met her 3 times. She kept me at an arm's length, but when I was with her, even though I was being emotionally hurt by her continued rejection, I, again, felt whole and complete, and I understood myself so much better because I saw myself so much in her. The appearance and behavior and mood, and, the ways that we dressed, the colors we chose, the way we moved. I mean, it was just uncanny. So it's just such an amazing experience of the biology of belonging that I've had in this journey. And it's so important to find all those pieces of ourselves as adoptees, to know who we are. I finally made sense because everything about me, I mean, my interests, my taste, the way I looked, the way I moved, the things I cared about were there in my DNA. And I never understood, when I grew up, people used to say it was nurture was more important than nature. And I want to tell you, no, it's the opposite, because 95% of me was DNA, and 5% was, being given opportunities and things that I might not have had if I'd grown up in my family of origin. But um, and yes, the other thing that I think is interesting to address, people say, well, adoptees often have difficult biological families. There might be mental illness or drug addiction, or there's problems and reasons why the child can't be kept. And so the children are very lucky not to be with that family. And I would argue that, well, there might be kinship adoption. There might be grandparents or aunts or uncles or other people in the family that would like to adopt them. And in they may not be wealthy or well off. There may be issues there, but there are issues in any family. A biological child doesn't come into a family and be guaranteed that there's no issues of addiction or difficulty or mental health in their family, and they are just expected to deal with it like everyone else in the family does. Same opportunity should be given to an adoptee. And you have to wonder, when there's such a foundational breach as being separated from who you really are and living a life that you know is a lie, you are weakened in all the ways that I talked about earlier to handle all the stresses that come at you. Yes, you would have had stresses growing up in your family of origin, but if you didn't have that foundational primal damage, would you have been strong enough to handle those? So, there's all different kinds of trauma, and it's not fair to say that you're saving a child from trauma by adopting them, because no family is without it. And it's also infantilizing that adoptee to not think that they could, that the strengths that they would have, there are other reasons, other strengths that they'd have to face issues that they are now weakened by to face the issues in their adoptive family. So there's just a lot about adoption that is so difficult for the adoptee, and it is difficult to face. And I really relied on all the reading I'd done, all the studying I'd done, but also therapy to work through the unsettling things I learned about myself and my background, and just the sort of disruption to a sense of self that you have. And yet at the same time, the knowledge I found out in meeting my biological family affirmed so much about me and helped me build a foundation, a literal sort of structure within inside myself to better handle everything in life, to be a stronger person, to be more affirmed, to make sense to myself, and to take all those little pieces of who I was genetically and all the things I had been given as an adoptee and kind of put them together, because ultimately you end up in your life as not really a part of any of those families. You're not really a part of your adoptive family. You are, but you're not one of them. And you're not really a part of your biological family either, because you feel like you're a part of them, but you don't have any of the memories they do. You don't know all those inside jokes. You don't know how they celebrated Christmas and what it was like in the morning before school and how they handled homework and where they went on vacation. You don't know any of that. And so ultimately you're this person who has one foot in a few families, but you're never solidly a part of, you don't have that right of belonging kind of to any of them. It's that connection with your birth mother and your birth family is so powerful. My husband used the example once that I refer to, and he goes, there's on the battlefield, the dying soldier calls out for his mother. It's like that. Wow, ultimate sense of belonging and being cared for, and that someone that would always, that feeling that family will always be there for you and they'll always care for you. You don't get that as an adoptee. You ultimately, you have to learn everything you can about yourself to truly understand and help build that structure within inside of yourself to face the trauma that you've experienced, and then forgive yourself for all the ways that you felt sad and detached and stuff. That's normal. Given what you went through, those are normal reactions. They're not weird. So there's a lot, and I hope that people will be more sensitive to and understanding of these circumstances, so that we can change how we raise adopted children now. We can change the patterns of adoption to better suit the adoptee, and that when we're looking at new issues of identity, questions about reproductive rights, questions about donor-conceived individuals, we understand that the person that we're asking to the adoptee, the person we are asking to live that life, is someone whose shoes that most people don't understand what that's like. And despite outward appearances, there can be a lot of trauma. I also want to remind your listeners that adoptees have over 4 times the suicide rate of the normal population, of the natural population.
Wow.
And they are highly overrepresented in mental health and addictive hospitalizations. So the reactions of that, the results of that trauma are there. Something we just don't really recognize or talk about a lot, but it's very powerful and very deep. And I'm so appreciative of this conversation and the opportunity to raise some of these issues to your audience.
Wow. You covered it all. I mean, this is phenomenal. You have no idea what you did for me personally. And such a small scale. I mean, my goodness, you touched many people in many areas, I'm sure, in this whole process. Now, I think that your book, your story, is a standalone story, whether someone is adopted or not, or it's just it's relationship. It's you just touched.
Well, we all feel. I mean, we all feel rejected and abandoned and lost in life at different times.
Yes, yes. You, like I said, you covered it all, and I appreciate that. We are running very low on time, so is there anything, a sentence or two that you want to? I think you pretty well covered it, but if anything else that you want to say before we close, please do.
I would just say to anyone else out there, any adoptee or someone in these difficult circumstances, trust yourself. Affirm to yourself that the feelings you're having are there for a reason. And if you're struggling to really understand them, or you're feeling you're in a lot of pain, get help. And certainly nowadays there's such a wide community out there online of adoptees and of therapists that specialize in adoption. And but trust that the feelings you're feeling are there because you're experiencing something. And if you don't understand it or you need help processing, just ask for help. There are a lot of people that can now have those conversations with you and help you understand yourself better. And the only way out is through. And when you go there, you will get there.
Well, thank you again, Janet.
Well, thank you. And it sounds like I really enjoyed you sharing some of your story with me, and applaud the openness to which you had your own adoptive experience.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Janet, for being on Never, Ever Give Up Hope, which you definitely did not. And I thank you for sharing.
Thank you for listening to Never, Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.